And good evening to our fellow listeners and followers. Tonight is June 9th at 8:28 p.m. This is Federico Lines of States Rights Radio and
Seth Hancock of Seth Hancock Reports. And tonight's episode, we have an interview with author, researcher, and activist James Roguski about the World Health Organization and what the pandemic treaty and the recent amendments adopted mean for the rest of the world. First off, thank you, James, for taking the time to talk with us. If you want to just kind of give a brief overview of yourself and, why you've been following the World Health Organization.
Well, in many ways, I'm just a regular person. I'm 64 years old. I've done a lot of things in my life. I don't think you need the 64-year story. In essence, for a good section of that life, I worked as a carpenter, renovating old homes and fixing up old furniture, but also interspersed in there for a good period of my life. I managed a couple of mom and pop herb and nutrition stores, and I ended up doing the type of research that I've done with the WHO into health, written a couple of books. 18 years ago, I wrote Your Doctor is a Liar, and I've always given it away. You can go to yourdoctorisaliar.com and download the ebook. And so that prepared me pretty well for these past 4.5 years with COVID. In February of 2022, I had a decade's worth of work wiped off the internet because I wrote an article about what I call Run Death is Near, or Remdesivir. And when I rebuilt, what I had been doing, and that was kind of sort of a personal great reset. I got censored off the internet. I landed on a platform called Substack. Everything I've written since then is on jamesroguski.substack.com. And shortly thereafter, I found a document on the internet that was amendments to the international health regulations that the Biden administration had proposed in January of 2022. And I've been reporting from the WHO rabbit hole ever since.
Yeah, and, I know recently there's been some, a lot of news outlets haven't even covered the World Health Organization much at all, except for maybe some statements from Tedros and stuff like that. But there's not a whole lot of coverage of this pandemic treaty and but then I saw, a couple weeks ago, some conservative outlets like Breitbart saying that the pandemic treaty has failed. And then I saw your piece on June 1st that the amendments to the IHR have been adopted. And talk a little bit about those amendments and what has been adopted. What were some of these outlets that were claiming that the treaties failed? What were they trying to say? I mean, were they just completely off base? Just talk a little bit about where the treaty stands right now.
I'm going to have to give you a little tiny bit of background because the vast majority of everybody who has written or talked about this, the confusion has been enormous. And so I don't know how old you gentlemen are, but in Boston, Massachusetts, and that is when they adopted the international health regulations. So they've been around for 50-some years now, and most people have never even heard of them. They were very much severely amended in 2005. They were fraudulently amended in 2022. That's a whole other story. And on June 1st, the World Health Assembly, which is 194 nations plus 2 that are just connected to the IHR, they meet once a year in Geneva, and they are the governing body of the World Health Organization. So the World Health Organization is the bureaucracy that they do everything that they do all year long. And once a year, the assembly gets together and makes decisions on policy or things like amendments to the regulations. So those amendments were adopted on June 1st, and almost everybody started celebrating early, like a month and a half early, because it didn't look like the amendments were going to be adopted, because they were supposed to give a 4-month notice and provide the final documents all the way 4 months in advance, which would have been January 27th of 2024. And in addition to that, for the last 2+ years, they've been negotiating a new agreement. And this is how everybody has gotten everything confused. Many people may have heard of either the pandemic treaty, the pandemic agreement, the pandemic accord. It's actually really a framework convention, like the framework convention for climate change. And so that didn't fail. They actually extended the deadline, and they're continuing the negotiations. They're going to be starting back up in July, and they hope to complete those negotiations by the end of the year. So to use a sports analogy, okay, if you've ever seen somebody run, for a touchdown, and they're on maybe the 10-yard line and they start celebrating too soon, and they fumble or they get tackled or they spike the ball before they get into the end zone, that's pretty much what happened. A lot of people thought that it wasn't going to go through, but they worked till 2, 3, 4 in the morning to finish the negotiations late in the evening on Saturday the 1st, a little more than a week ago. They did adopt amendments. Now, I think a lot of it was done fraudulently and in violation of their own rules, but not one member state stood up and said, hey, wait a minute, this is wrong. They all went along with it. And the treaty, if you will, has gone into overtime, and they're continuing those negotiations.
Yeah, and for people like Federico and myself, we are really focused on the Constitution, and for a lot of Americans who don't, they don't even know that there is this World Health Organization or what they do. Talk a little bit about what the effects that these amendments may have on Americans in the near future.
This is actually wonderful. I'm happy to talk about this topic in specific. I've got my little tiny pocket constitution in my hand, but I don't need to look at it to encourage people to look at Article 1, Section 8, Clause 3. That's the Commerce Clause. And anybody familiar with the Constitution realizes that there's 18 enumerated authorities that the states gave to the federal government. And one of those is the Commerce Clause, which is the federal government has the authority to regulate international commerce with foreign nations. There has been so much misinformation about what these the new agreement, or the amendments to the international health regulations are. And primarily, the new agreements are mostly about money. You'd be better off thinking about the Trans-Pacific Partnership or NAFTA or any other trade agreement. You get a better view of what's going on here. I'll try to summarize it. But you first have to erase all of the things that you think you know about drugs and jabs and masks and diagnostic tests. I'm going to guess, I don't know everyone in your audience, I don't know what they all think about drugs and jabs and masks and diagnostic tests, but the prevailing belief structure of all of the people who are involved with these negotiations is that if we wanted to prevent the next pandemic, prepare for it, or react or respond to it, oh my goodness, they want to have those products universally available, flowing like water or the air that you breathe, manufactured all over the world, so that if you want a drug or a jab or masks or some kind of diagnostic test, there would be unlimited supply. They refer to that as a global public good. Now, my personal opinion, everyone else is entitled to have their own, is masks do not stop respiratory ailments. The diagnostic tests are not tests at all if we're talking about the PCR. Anyone knows about Kerry Mullis, who's the inventor of the process. It's a valuable laboratory process, but it is not a diagnostic tool. He said that himself. He won a Nobel Prize for his, invention. I would think he would, be someone who could tell you something about his own invention. The drugs like remdesivir, picked up a nickname Run Death is Near, and there really is ample evidence that it causes kidney damage, and it's been applied in an inappropriate way. And many of the jabs have been taken off the market, and there's so much evidence that they're not really vaccines. They don't give immunity. They're more like a therapy. There was a recent court case, that is bringing something back into court to determine whether or not these are viable as being called a vaccine. They changed the definition, meaning the CDC changed the definition of a vaccine on September 1st or 2nd, 2021, simply because these products, these mRNA jabs, do not give immunity. They do not stop infection. They do not stop transmission. And so the belief structure that has been the foundation of these negotiations is, if we just had more of these, the world would be a better place. We would be better protected from any kind of upcoming pandemic. And so the negotiated agreement and the amendments to the international health regulations that was signed on June 1st essentially said, well, we want to get a financing mechanism together so that we can build factories to manufacture these things in every region, in every country around the world. And that's not an attack on our Constitution. That's a really bad idea, but it does fall under the regulation of international commerce. Now, a lot of people have not read the documents, not interpreted them properly, and they have argued, this is going to be in violation of our Constitution. Well, the thing that's in violation of the Constitution is that back in 1969, when this group of delegates met and agreed to the initial international health regulations, those regulations did not come back to the United States to be considered by the Senate. They were not asked to give their advice. The negotiations happened. I don't believe there's any record that they asked the senators what they thought about it, and they certainly did not get their consent. What they did was they said, every nation sent a delegate, an appointed official, a bureaucrat, who went along with the adoption. And so they said, we'll give every nation 9 months, and if you simply write a letter of rejection, then you and your nation can opt out. Well, Nixon was the president during that time period. Obviously, they did not write a letter to opt out, and so it was assumed that you're fine. Kind of like if you're at a wedding and they say, if anyone should oppose this matrimony, speak now or forever hold your peace. Well, nobody spoke up, so we're in. In 2005, the United States mission to Geneva did write a letter to the WHO, and they made what's called a reservation. And they gave a couple of criteria, very interesting. I won't go down that rabbit hole, but I've written articles just about that. But again, the Senate was not consented. They did not, they were not consulted, and they did not give their consent. They gave neither advice nor consent. In 2022, amendments were fraudulently adopted. The WHO simply said that they adopted amendments, but they never actually voted. Now, the United States was pushing for that. They were the ones who pushed it through, so they didn't reject it because they were obviously pushing for it. But 4 nations around the world did write a letter of rejection to the WHO. And interestingly enough, those nations are the Islamic Republic of Iran, the Kingdom of the Netherlands, Slovakia, and New Zealand. And so these amendments this year, on June 1st, were primarily pushed by the United States, the European Union, and quite frankly, all the countries around the world wanted this because it's a business deal. Now, we still have, according to their rules, between 10 and 18 months to get our head of state to write a letter to the WHO to reject these amendments. Now, anybody who's read the Constitution is going to say, hey, wait a minute, Jim. How come they never voted on this? Well, there are well over 10,000 international agreements that have never seen the light of day in the Senate. And so, theoretically, I absolutely, completely, and totally agree. There are so many agreements that, with Supreme Court rulings and just historical, ignorance of the rule, our president and other members of the executive branch have gotten us into agreements that did not meet the criteria, but they treat them as if it did. And, until we, the people, make such a ruckus about all of that, they've been getting away with it, and they're going to keep getting away with it until we put our feet down and say, wait a minute, those, foreign entanglements should be invalid, but there are, unfortunately, Supreme Court precedents and so forth. It's quite the mess. But, as I see it right now, that's the state of affairs with what's happened so far with these international health regulations.
Yeah, and you brought up a good point about the people need to kind of raise a ruckus on this. That's been a theme for Federico and myself for a while, that it's not so much elections that are going to change things in America. It's going to be the American people desiring to attend these types of treaties, and it goes beyond just the World Health Organization. We've seen this for a while with presidents declaring war without congressional approval. We see it with gun control executive orders and stuff like that Congress never has a say. What are some of the things that you suggest that people do who are, kind of just now becoming aware of these types of things? What can people do to kind of make their voices heard on this?
Well, step number one is to get informed and be clear on, what these amendments to the international health regulations really are, what this proposed agreement or treaty is being prepared to be, and realize that in 10 and 18 months to get our head of state to write a letter of rejection, that brings you into April. And so there may be a new administration, whomever that may be. I'm not prepared to predict. But if on January 20th, 2025, a president is going to be sworn into office, they'll have a couple of months to write a letter to the WHO, and that's really all that's needed. Now, on a bigger level, for an organization that has done the types of things that the WHO has done, and especially with the way these documents have been secretly negotiated, when you're in a relationship that has become not what it was originally intended, sometimes you need to exit that relationship. And so there's a piece of legislation in the House of Representatives, H.R. 79, House Resolution 79, put forth by Andy Biggs out of Arizona, that is called the WHO Withdrawal Act. It's a page and a half long. It's very easy to read. You can see all of this information on exitthewho.com, exitthewho.com. There's only really 3 points. Number one, it says we would give the WHO the 1 year notice that we promised. that we are leaving. And that's something that Donald Trump had Secretary of State Pompeo write that letter in June or July, I forget which it was, in 2020, to start that process. When Biden came into office, he sent a letter saying, no, never mind, we're going to stay in. The second part of the bill would stop funding the WHO, and the third part would repeal the joint resolution of Congress from 1948 that got us involved in the first place. So we didn't sign on properly. We didn't have a Senate 2/3 majority consent and then ratified by President Truman. What they did is called a Congressional Executive Agreement, where both houses of Congress in 1948 signed us into the WHO. And so Congress can sign us out. And the other thing that we need is for people to help reach out to their senators, because not one senator, despite efforts for a year and a half now, not one senator has done what is needed to be done in the Senate, which is just copy Andy Biggs's House legislation and submit it into the Senate as a companion piece. Literally, all they would have to do is tell their staffer, copy H.R. 79 and do whatever little details might be needed to submit it into the Senate. So if anybody goes to exitthewho.com, they can get all of that information. Now, we have already gotten 60 members of Congress to sign on. And one of the easy ways to start is to reach out to any of those Congress people and call up them. You're not going to talk to the congressperson, you'll get a staff member, but call them up and say thanks and give them your support. At least we have 60 members of Congress who want to get out of the WHO. And for anybody who wants to start taking action, call them up and encourage them to start speaking up more loudly.
Yeah, and we talk about, America, the whole idea is supposed to be freedom and liberty and independence. And, I have a problem with just, even if the WHO were doing things I agreed with, which I don't agree with what they're doing, I don't like the idea of some global organization dictating policy in America. And, when it comes to health, what it sounds like is, and we know what it feels like with COVID, this one-size-fits-all policy when it comes to viruses and diseases and stuff like that. And to me, that's one of the big problems when it comes to healthcare. Everybody's different, and we have some global institution dictating how everybody needs to prepare for a potential pandemic, and everybody's different. Do you with this with these amendments that were just passed, what kind of teeth do they have in it? If, let's say, we stay within the WHO, but we decide not to follow these amendments, is there any action that the World Health Organization can take?
Actually, no. And there's been a lot of information or misinformation about what is in these amendments. And so I'll dive down into that as quickly as I can here. When the United States Congress passed the joint resolution in 1948 and President Truman signed it on June 14th, what it says in there, it's a very short document, actually, and you can read it on exitthewho.com. It says that nothing that the WHO decides can require us to do anything. And so that is something that everyone should pay attention to. But because there has been rampant misinformation about what is in these amendments, And what I started with was the Commerce Clause, Article 1, Section 8, Clause 3. The federal government does have the authority to throw money at the WHO. And so what we're really dealing with here is a financial agreement that all the nations around the world said, hey, we want to build out our healthcare system and our manufacturing capability. Think NAFTA and the great sucking sound of, business leaving the United States and being offshore. Well, this is what the nations around the world want. They were unhappy when nations like Canada got a contract for 400 million jabs for 40 million people. The nations around the world said, hey, wait a minute, you guys are hogging up all this wonderful stuff. We want our equitable access to those pandemic-related products. Now, I understand they should be counting their blessings that they didn't get them, but you got to realize this isn't about your health. This is really about a transfer of wealth. And so the oligarchs in nations around the world realize that if they can get money flowing in their direction and build out the manufacturing capacity to make drugs and jabs and masks and so forth, there's a lot of profit to be made. If there's another thing that, is people are afraid of and then they go running to get these, what I think are very harmful products. This is a money grab more than anything. And so what I want people to recognize, there was an interview about a year ago with the Aspen Institute, which is an interesting organization. Not so much a fan, but they interviewed 3 separate health and human services secretaries. The current Javier Becerra, and previous under Obama, Kathleen Sebelius, and under Trump, Alex Azar. And they asked them some fundamental questions, and it was very enlightening. When they asked Javier Becerra, what would you like the American people to know about the Department of Health and Human Services? He didn't miss a beat. He immediately said, I want every American to understand that the federal government does not have any authority over healthcare. Now, I have to admit, I was a little bit surprised that he spoke the truth. But then he kept going. And he said, but we do have a lot of money. And when we put money behind Medicare or Medicaid or Obamacare or whatever, people volunteer to participate in order to receive the benefits. And that's the federal government's MO. That's their trick. Mm-hmm. They can't make you do anything, but they certainly can entice you. Now, you take that down to a state level, and if a state says to a school board, well, be happy to give you millions of dollars, but here's what you got to do. Many people found out that the reason why their school system was mandating masks and jabs for children was not for the health of the children, but for the wealth of the school district and the people involved with funneling all that money through their system. What we're dealing with here is not law or authority. We're dealing with corruption. Now, Kathleen Sebelius said, she was under Obama, she talked about a different thing. She said, well, other nations, they don't really like it when we send military boots on the ground. And so in many of the nations of Africa, the boots on the ground are also wearing white coats. And she said, I believe that we've got HHS staff in at least 50 countries around the world. They are implementing what they call the security agenda. Okay, the Global Health Security Agenda. They changed the name to the Global Health Security Strategy. And in December of 2022, Congress passed and Biden signed the National Defense Authorization Act. That allocated $5 billion to build out infrastructure around the world through the World Bank's Pandemic Fund. They give hundreds of millions of dollars every year to build out infrastructure, and the latest round in 2023, 37 different nations, a lot in the Caribbean and South America and so forth, got not just the United States money, but they've pulled together many other countries. And, they're building out this type of infrastructure that is highly, highly profitable. Now, back in November of 2022, a month before they passed that bill, I was blessed to have found and watched the B20 meeting, not the G20 with the governments, but the B20 with all the business leaders. And the Indonesian health minister was addressing all of the business leaders in Bali. And he said, look, next month, the the United States Defense Department and the Pandemic Fund and the World Bank are going to start up a multi-billion-dollar fund. And this is a great business opportunity. Go invest. And so what we're dealing with here is a transfer of funds to build out the industry sector that's incredibly profitable. I mean, look at the trillions of dollars that were spent during the 4 years or so of COVID. Now, to bring this back to the constitutional issue, because I have an opportunity to talk to everybody here about that, a lot of times things are said that, quite frankly, drive me up a wall. Because a lot of people are saying, well, the federal government does not have authority over health care. The states do. And I'm here to tell you that that's not the right way to talk about this. The 10th Amendment says if the federal government has not been expressly granted the authority, then the authority goes to the states or to the people. Now, by my count, I'm still searching and I'm still reading and I'm still looking, but I believe there's only 13 states that when you read the state constitution, you find anything giving states authority over health. In the vast majority of the states, the people in that state have never given over any authority to their state to regulate health. And all of the work that their state does in regards to health is outside of not only the federal constitution, but also the state constitution. So if you hear anybody say that the states have authority over healthcare, you better go read your constitution. Now, and I mean state constitution. Now, they might, in a lot of the states, the only rights that they have is if they have people incarcerated in the state prison system, then they would be obligated to provide health care for the people who are incarcerated. Other states are, it is clear that the people in their constitution, New York State is an example, they unfortunately have in their constitution said that the state government should, oversee healthcare. But if you do a word search in your state constitution for the word health or healthcare or anything related, it's very much likely that you're going to be shocked. They don't have constitutional authority to do anything about healthcare. And I think that is, a very, very well-kept secret. And so whoever may be listening, dig up your state's constitution and find out for yourself if everything that your state is doing has been a deception. They probably do not have any constitutional authority to dip their toe into the control of health. That belongs to the people.
That's a very good point, James. And many people aren't aware of this, but many people are definitely unaware on the 9th Amendment, which is the People's Rights Amendment. And that's the reason why it's before the 10th, and it could be on life, on marriage, on schools, on healthcare. It is the decision. There are certain rights that belong to the people and not subject for government control, whether state or federal. And that's, many people are unaware that they automatically say, they're going to give back to the states, and they're now talking about overturning Loving versus Virginia and bringing back marriage back to the states. And I go, wait a minute. What about the 9th? What about that 9th on the people's electors? And with the with their secretarial delegation if they approve of any treaty. Now, I know you brought the right to enforce commerce. I think they have. I said that they have a right to to administer commerce. I think the commerce should be left to the states and to, again, the people. So this is where, we've been bloated with a oversized federal government, partially thankful to, I'm being sarcastic, thankful to the 16th Amendment. And that's, where we take everything for granted. Now, you mentioned the three secretaries of Health and Human Services under Obama, the current one, and Trump. And they all said the same thing, funding. They all said the same thing, control. And that's thanks to the control of funding and people.
Understanding of regulation is more to make regular, okay? And so interstate commerce, you wouldn't necessarily want to have one set of rules between, this set of states and that set of states. It's meant to be uniformity. Everyone is treated the same. But really the point that I'm getting at is people who are talking about the WHO and how the federal government has, the ability to engage with the WHO, the confusion has been over the misinformation that the WHO is going to tell you how to, make your health decisions. And that is not really what's in these negotiations. What's in these negotiations is globally, how's the money going to flow so that poorer nations build out their big pharma? Now, there's another thing. I know we only have maybe about 9 minutes or so. The other aspect of what is in the international health regulations, to me, is absolutely horrifying. Now, this has been in there since 2005, and it's an absolute violation of fundamental freedoms and bodily autonomy. And now it's not the WHO mandating this. It's an agreement amongst all of the nations that if you travel outside of the United States or wherever you live, you travel outside of your country. When you land in the other country or a boat or a train or whatever, you're no longer protected by the Bill of Rights. You're on another country's soil. You're under their jurisdiction. And the agreement amongst all of the nations is that they can, the word they use is compel. They can go into a little room and a medical personnel came at them with a syringe and an alcohol swab looking for an arm to stick it in, and they had to stand their ground to protect themselves from that. And I know people who volunteered in advance to take the jabs that they were told they were going to need, to travel wherever, and it totally destroyed their health to the point where now they're very strong health freedom advocates. They've got organizations because of what happened to them. Now, a lot of people don't think about this, but they actually, in these amendments, in my opinion, are engaging in fascism, because in Articles 24, 27, and a couple of the annexes, they want to employ, that's not really the right word, they want to insist that the businesses that operate the travel companies, they refer to them as conveyance operators, are to implement the national health measures while you're embarking or disembarking. So the governments want the companies to do their dirty work. And I see that as an absolute, complete, and total violation of everyone's bodily autonomy. But here's the trick that they're playing. They can't do that if you hold a U.S. passport and you're coming back into the country. But they can do it if you're traveling to another country. And, while everybody's just walking across the southern border, what they've instituted is for people who want to travel lawfully, wherever you may go outside of your home country, you are absolutely at their mercy. And so I've written many articles about this. Anybody can read these things. It's a horror show. And to me, it's something that, unfortunately, no one is really talking about.
Go ahead, Seth.
Yeah, and I think to just kind of wrap things up, one of the main points about all this, the guiding principle of these treaties, these amendments is money. It's follow the money, and not to get biblical, but it is Sunday. The love of money is the root of all kinds of evil. You had brought up earlier about schools, instituting mask mandates for the money, and I can attest to that. My day job is actually covering local government for a local newspaper, and I've been covering school boards and village boards for almost 2 decades now, and everything they do is about getting the federal dollars. I see very little local control left, and so when we talked about earlier what people can do, and contacting your legislators and congressmen, and I think it's also important for people to get in the ears of their local politicians, whether it be school boards, village boards, town boards, city councils. I think that's also very important to talk to your local politicians and get them to, try to establish local control in their municipality. But is that something that you see is very important as well, to talk to your local government as well?
I couldn't stress that enough. The type of work that you're saying that you're doing is really the most important thing. I've been saying for many, many months, the local tyrants who attempted to or managed to abuse your over the last 4.5 to 5 years, they didn't need any amendments to the international health regulations. They didn't need any new pandemic treaty to either do or attempt to do what they did over the past 4 to 5 years. So those local issues still need to be resolved. The emergency planning, rules that they follow or overstep, and the control mechanisms that they have in place. If anything, they've passed laws since COVID in many jurisdictions to make them even worse. I live in the Los Angeles area. In this regard, it's probably one of the worst. But within LA County, there's the city of Palmdale where the local activists there, they put signs out, on on-ramps to the highway so people would see them. And they got people together and they pressured their city council to pass an ordinance in Palmdale, California, that says there shall be no mask or jab mandates. And so that kind of activism is what we need on a, school board, city council, county board of directors or supervisors or whatever they call them, state assemblies, governor offices, and so forth. The abuse is local. They want the money to flow to nations around the world to build the infrastructure to make the products that they would abuse you with. But ultimately it's implemented by, your friends and neighbors who are drunk on power in regards to overstepping their authority. It's highly likely that they do not have any constitutional authority over your health. That belongs completely and totally to we the people.
Yeah, and as just to reiterate, that is a good statement to know, and not only know your federal Constitution Bill of Rights, but know your like I said, the Ninth Amendment, which I think it has been a very underrated and underestimated amendment that people just fail not to grab because the power, the control of what the federal government has done to crush that into coming with funds, coming with support. Now, it all starts with local, and we have to tell that local government and state government that we want to cut off federal funding from this, and whatever it is, from schools to interior fishing, interior parks, which I know California's got the best parks, but quite honestly, I think California could be they could preserve their parks on their own. The same thing in Montana and every single state across this union. But I think it all starts, as you said, with we the people. And you're right. I think the state governments are the most cruel out there. The federal government has been very cruel, but that's a good point to have. One last thought, James. Any insight of your books, your articles, where people can find you and all that?
Well, I always give people my phone number. It's 310-619-3055. It's on the bottom footer of every article that I have on Substack. You can go to jamesroguski.substack.com, ROGUSKI. But you can also just remember to go to exit.who.com, and you'll find all my work through there as well. Exit.who.com.
Perfect. Yeah, no, this has been very enlightening to know more about the World Health Organization and the World Health treaties and what the government is hiding from we the people. So, James, it's been a great pleasure, and if you want to come back with more information, we'll gladly set another time.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Sure. Have yourself a great night, everybody, and we'll catch you next Sunday. Thank you again, James.
Thank you.
Good night.